My swan glides across the sky. Shall we dance? Stars twinkle, lighting my eyes. To enchant the mystery keeps her pace. With a glance, a gentle hand touches my face. New romance balanced atop the staircase. Take a stand as the keystone here I am placed. So advanced, reverie delight, spinning, twirling and lost in their mind, riding high on the cloudy sky, walking permanent skies, elementals realize how eternity blends with in the infinite. As far as eyes can see, stand the heavenly symbol. My heart trembles. My storm glides across the sky. Shall we dance? Stars twinkle, lighting my eyes. Till enchant the mystery keeps her pace. And with a glance, a gentle hand touches my face. New romance, reverie delight, spinning, twirling and lost in their mind, riding up on a cloudy sky, walking permanent skies, elementals realize how eternity blends within the infinite. As far as eyes can see, stand the heavenly symbol. My heart trembles, reverie and delight, spinning, twirling and lost in their mind, riding up on the cloudy sky, walking permanent skies, elementals realize nothing on the earth can compare to enchant this truth so extraordinary. With a glance, my loving host extends a hand. New romance and magically as me, shall we dance? Welcome, welcome, welcome. You know, I love my love that takes my breath away. And I love a love that is beyond words, what words can say. And this is where I am today. But I will try to put my feet back on the ground and deliver my little chat. And today's subject is the Holy Royal Arch of Jerusalem. And for me, since I am self-taught or self-taught, Mother always guides me to information or data that shows me my level of consciousness. And thanks to this understanding, I don't need to share where the information came from, because the point of this program is to follow one's own inner guidance. There are a multiplicity of channels out there that happily empower egos, and that's okay with me because I only trust Mother, and yet I understand her orchestration. And for my purpose, this channel is Taking Back Sunday in my own experience. Since I am all or the only one, I am able to affect or change, being the light of my world. Oh, I was taking back Sunday, which means being the light of my own world. Okay, I told you I'm trying to come back down. Okay, let's get started. Freemasonry, under the English Constitution, reaches its climax and conclusion in the Order of the Holy Royal Arch. There exists a variety of other degrees ramifying from the main stem of the Masonic system, which either elaborate side points of its doctrines or re-express its teachings in alternative symbolism. These, while of greater or less merit and interest, are beyond our present consideration, and indeed are superfluities, tending rather to diffuse the student's attention rather than to deepen his insight into the central purpose of the craft. The taking of additional higher degrees may be indulged in almost indefinitely, but to what purpose if the initial ones, which contain all that is necessary for the understanding of the subject, remain imperfectly assimilated? It is a fallacy to suppose that the multiplying degrees will result in the discovery of important arcane secrets which one has failed to find in the rites of the craft and the Royal Arch. The higher degrees indeed illustrate truths of much interest and often set forth with impressive ceremonial beauty, the appreciation of which will be the greater after and not before the meaning of the preliminary ones has been thoroughly absorbed. Whilst the pursuit of secrets is certain to prove illusory, for the only secrets worth the name or the finding are those incommunicable ones which discover themselves within the personal consciousness of the lover of truth, who is in earnest to translate ceremonial representation into facts of spiritual experience. It was accordingly a sound instinct that prompted those who settled the present constitution of the order to exclude these supplementary refinements and to declare that Masonry consists of the 3 craft degrees and the Holy Royal Arch and no more. For within that compass is exhibited, or at least outlined, the entire process of human regeneration, so that after the Royal Arch there really remains nothing more to be said, although what has been said is of course capable of elaboration. The completeness of regeneration theoretically postulated in those 4 stages is marked, it should be observed, by the very significant expression used in connection with the Royal Arch chapter, which is interpreted as saying, my people having obtained mercy, which in its further analysis signifies that all the parts and faculties, i.e. people, of the candidate's organism have at last, and as a result of one's previous discipline and ordeals, become sublimated and integrated in a new quality and higher order of life than that previously enjoyed in virtue of his merely temporal nature. In a word, one has become regenerated. One has achieved the miracle of squaring the circle, a metaphoric expression for regeneration, as shall be explained presently. Although but an expansion and completion of the third degree, of which at one time it formed part, there were good reasons for detaching the royal arch portion from what now the degree of Master Mason. And I always, meditating and thinking, and I said the royal arch, the RA. I was like, oh, it's the rod degrees. The two parts in combination made an inconveniently long rite, whilst the change in the symbolic appointments and officers of the temple of initiation was necessary. As the ceremony proceeded, to give appreciation, spectacular representation to the further points calling for expression. Despite this rearrangement of the royal arch in the natural the royal arch is the natural conclusion and fulfillment of the third degree. The latter indicates the necessity of mystical death and dramatizes the process of such death and revival, therefore into newness of life. The royal arch carries the process a stage further by showing its fulfillment in the exaltation or apotheosis of him who has undergone it. And in prior discussions, I've tried to explain, Venus being exalted by Libra as she, is crowned by Pisces. And then, descend back as Aries, Queen of Heaven. The Master Mason's degree might be said to be represented in the terms of the Christian theology by the formula, he suffered and was buried and rose again, whilst the equivalent of the exaltation ceremony is he ascended into heaven. The royal arch degree seeks to express that new and intensified life to which the candidate can be raised and the exalted degree of consciousness that comes with it, which I got ahead of myself, is the meaning of Ra. From being conscious merely as a natural man and in the natural restricted way common to everyone born into the world, he becomes exalted whilst still in his natural flesh to consciousness in a supernatural and illimitable way. As has been said in previous lectures and discussions, in previous discussions, the purpose of all initiation is to lift the human consciousness from lower to higher levels by quickening the latent spiritual potentialities in man to their full extent through appropriate discipline. No higher level of attainment is possible than that in which the human emerges in the sublime consciousness and knows as the goddess knows, and that being the level of which the order of the royal arch treats ceremonially. It follows that masonry, which is my son, as a sacramental system, reaches the climax and conclusion in that order. As has already been discussed, to attain that level involves as its essential prerequisite the total abnegation, renouncement, and renovation of one's original nature, the surrender of one's natural desires, tendencies, and preconceptions, and the abandonment and nullifying of one's natural self-will by such a habitual discipline and self-denial and gradual but vigorous opposition to all these, as will cause them gradually to atrophy and die down. He that loveth his life shall lose it, and he that hateth his life in this world shall keep it unto life eternal. Except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. As with the seed of wheat, so with man. If one persists in clinging to the present natural life he knows, if one refuses to acknowledge that a higher quality of life is here and now possible, or is unwilling to make the necessary effort to attain it, he abideth alone and gets nowhere, and only frustrates his own spiritual evolution. But if one is willing to die in the sense indicated, if one will so reorientate the will and silence the natural energies and desires as to give the vital and immortal principle within the chance to assert itself and supersede them, then from the disintegrated material of one's own nature, that germ of true life will spring into growth in him and bear much fruit. And by the stepping stones of initiation, one will arise from dead self to higher things that can otherwise experience. The necessity of dying is not, we repeat, the physical death of the body, but a mystical death in life of everything except the body is the first and fundamental fact to be grasped before one may hope to realize or even to understand the mystery of the royal arch degree. Mors Yanua Vitae. Death to self is the portal to true life. There is no other way. It is the unescapable law and condition of the soul's progress. But since it is a process involving a most serious trial of fortitude and fidelity, and a grapple with oneself from which the timorous and self-diffident may well shrink, the mystery systems have always exhibited an example for the instruction, encouragement, and emulation of those prepared to make the attempt and the necessary sacrifice. To hearten them to the task, the initiatory colleges have held up a prototype in the person of some great soul who has already trodden the same path and emerged triumphant therefrom. It matters nothing whether the prototype be one whose historic actuality and identity can be demonstrated, or whether one can be regarded only as legendary or mythical. The point being not to teach a merely historical fact, but to enforce a spiritual principle. In Egypt, the prototype was a Tsar who was slain by his malignant brother Typhon, but whose mangled limbs were collected in a coffer from which he emerged reintegrated and divinized. In Greece, the prototype was Bacchus, who was torn to pieces by the Titans. Baldur in Scandinavia and Mithra in Greco-Roman Europe were similar prototypes. In Masonry, the prototype is Hiram Abiff, who met his death as the result of a conspiracy by a crowd of workmen, of whom there were three principal ruffians. In the Christian and chief of all systems, since it comprehends and re-expresses all the others, the greatest of the exemplars die at the hands of the mob, headed also by three chief ruffians: Judas, Caiaphas, and Pilate. If in Masonry the mystical death is dramatized more realistically than the resurrection that follows upon it, that resurrection is nevertheless shown in the raising of the candidate to the rank of Master Mason and his reunion with the companions of former toils, implying the reintegration and resumption of all one's old faculties and powers in a sublimated state, just as the limbs of the risen Asar or Osiris was said to reunite into a new whole, and as the Christian master withdrew his mutilated body from the tomb and resumed it, transmuted into one of supernatural substance and splendor. We have, therefore, now to consider how the Royal Arch degree exhibits the attainment of a new order of life. But it may be as well to say in advance that for those unhabituated to looking beyond surface values or face value and material meanings, the exposition about to be given, dealing as it will with the profound spiritual truths and advanced psychological experience allegorized by the external ceremonial, is likely to present some difficulty of comprehension and acceptance. The Royal Arch, however, would not be the supreme degree it is, did it not move upon a supremely high level of thought and instruction. It was not compiled to accommodate the elementary intelligence, theoretically characterizing the philosophy untrained neophyte. It presupposes that the candidate or the lover of truth has passed through a long, strenuous period of purification and mental discipline, in the course of which one's understanding has become very considerably widened and deepened, whilst one's fidelity to the high inward light, which has conducted one safely so far, has induced in him a humility and docility fitting one for what still awaits. The attainment of that wisdom which is concealed from this world's wise and prudent, but is revealed unto babes. It is a rite of initiation, dealing with one's gross corporeal nature and one ordinary temporal mentality, which have been the subject of purification in the earlier degrees than with the higher reaches and possibilities of one's understanding and consciousness. As it is, what can be said here can at best be but a partial and incomplete exposition of a thing, calling rather for things must rather for disciplined imagination and reverent reflection than for reasoned argument. Certain with diffidence and at the risk of their being misunderstood or rejected by such as do not yet realize that in these matters the letter killeth, the spirit vivifieth, and that spiritual truth must be spiritually discerned. Before interpreting the ceremony itself, it is desirable first to indicate 4 noteworthy features connected with the Supreme Order and distinctifying it from 3 grades leading to it. And I meant to have that symbol, like that 3 with the slash thing, that everybody, like the Hindus have the symbol. Anyway, in speaking even of these incidentals, the before mentioned difficulties of both expositions and apprehensions will already make themselves felt. First, no one can be received into a chapter without first having attained Master Mason's rank. And yes, I'm self-taught. My me. My me. M-A-I-M-I-M-I-M-E. So, 2 on the inside, 2 on the outside. Okay. Second, the circular symbol of the grand geometrician, which in the 2nd degree shone high above in the ceiling of the temple, and in the 3rd degree had moved downward and burned as a glimmering ray in the east to guide the candidate's feet into the way of peace, has now descended completely to the checkerwork floor, where it rests as the center and cubical focus of the entire organism, and bears the sacred and ineffable name, as also those of Solomon and the 2 Hirims. Third, the constitution of the assembly is no longer one of 7 officers, but of 9, who are grouped in 3 triads about the sacred symbol. And in the Kemetic Society, we know this is the Per Im Heru, coming forth by day and night. Fourth, the assembly. That's why I say I'm taking back Sunday. Just restoring. She's re-giving me the information. That other. There's no other, but in this game of hide and seek has been hidden from me, and my passion has led me to the restoration of the knowledge. Okay. The Constitution of the Assembly is no longer, okay, I said that already. Fourth, the Assembly, regarded as a unity, is no longer designated a lodge, but a chapter. And it's so funny, in 2014, my sister wrote a book, and asked her, she didn't have any children or anything. So I was like, this is your baby. I was like, may I have the honor of, doing a baby shower. And so we did a beautiful event at the Akron Women's City Center here in Akron, Ohio. And it's so funny now to, put everything together, because I innocently just did that event out of love for my sister, but the name of her book was Talitha Kumi, A Woman Arise. And fast forward, now I'm discovering that Talitha Kumi was a little maiden that Jesus rose from the dead, which is symbolic of our rebirth, this stage. Okay, I'm not going to be in chatty. The first of these points, that none but a master mason can enter the royal arch, has already been accounted for. It is not feasible, nor is it within the law governing the process of spiritual evolution. For any who has not experienced a stage of mystical death to have experience of that which lies beyond the death, as an unborn physical infant can know nothing of this world, in which nevertheless it exists, until actually initiated into it by birth. So the embryonic spiritual child cannot be born into conscious function upon the plane of the spirit until it has become entirely detached from the enfolding carnal matrix and tendencies to which it has been habituated. And that is the very state of not being able to serve two masters. You can't be on this path and still trying to do Bitcoin and all that other silly stuff in a world that is disintegrating. But anyway, I'm sorry. The second and third points can be considered together. The rearrangement of factors constituting the ceremonial temple are symbolic of a structural rearrangement which has occurred in the candidate's own psychical organization. This has undergone a repolarization as the result of the descent into it of that high central light which at first but shone as it were in his heavens afar off and above him. So you know that within the brain we have the 12 cranial nerves, illumining the dormer window of his natural intelligence. Consider deeply what this change implies. The day star from on high has now visited. The frontal source of all consciousness has descended into the very checkered work material of one's transient physical organism, not merely permeating it temporarily with light, but taking root and becoming grafted there substantially and permanently. In theological language, God has become man, and man has become divinized in virtue of this descent and union. In Masonic terms, the vital and immortal principle reside in the candidate has at last superseded the temporal life principle and established one upon a new center of incorruptible life. Now, and perhaps only now, becomes thoroughly appreciable the necessity for the earlier purifications, disciplines, self-crucifixion, and death of all the lower nature. How could the purity of the sublime essence tabernacle in the coarse body of the sensualist? How could the eternal wisdom unfold its treasures in a mind benighting or caring for nothing but base metals and material pursuits. How could the universal will cooperate with and function through the mind whose petty personal will blocks its channel, antagonizing it at every turn with one's selfish preferences and disordered desires? A master mason, then, in the full sense of the term, is no longer an ordinary person, but a sublime one in whom the universal and the personal consciousness have come into union. Obviously, the quality of life and consciousness of such a one must differ vastly from that of other men. One's whole being is differently qualitated and geared upon another center. Because that is totality. That new center, as I've discussed in prior discussions, Brahma, new center is described as the grand geometrician of man's personal universe, inasmuch as its action upon the organism of whoever surrenders oneself to its influence causes a redisposition of functional and conscious faculty. The geometry, literally earth measuring, determining the occult potentialities of the human earth or temporal organism under spiritual stresses. In other words, the body and the spirit. God geometrizes, wrote Plato, with intimate knowledge of this subject. Many of the Euclidean and Pythagorean theorems, now regarded merely as mathematical demonstrations, were originally expressions veiled in mathematical glyphs of the esoteric science of soul building or true masonry. The well-known 47th proposition of the first book of Euclid is an example of this, and in consequence has come, though few, even modern Masons, could explain why, to be inscribed upon the past master's official jewel. Again, the squaring of the circle, that problem which has baffled so many modern mathematicians, is an occult expression signifying that deity, symbolized by the all-containing circle, has attained form and manifestation in a square or a human soul. It expresses the mystery of the incarnation accomplished within the personal spirit. Under the stress then of the geometricizing principle now found symbolically integrated within the candidate's temporal organism, a redistribution of his component powers has become effected. One's repolarized condition is symbolized by an equilateral triangle with a point at its center, and such a triangle will be found worked in gold upon the sash worn by the companions of the order. The significance of this triangle is that the tripartite aspect of one who wears it, that is, the spiritual, psychic, or astral and physical parts of him, now stand equalized and equilibrated around their common life principle, the center, fitted and equipped for its purpose. Yet each of these three divisions, though in itself unitary, is philosophically triadic in composition when subjected to intellectual analysis. Every monad is the parent of a triad, is another maxim of the ancients who anticipated the modern Hegelian proposition of metaphysics that thesis, antithesis, and synthesis are the essential ingredients of a given truth. Hence, it comes about that the three aspects of each of the three sides of our equilateral triangle are ceremonially personified by the 9 officers of the chapter. 3 in the east, representing the spiritual side. 3 in the west, figuring the soul or psychical side. And 3 subordinate links connecting these other 2. And I don't necessarily agree with how they related those, but no matter. These will be further and more conveniently treated of later when the symbolic nature of the officer is dealt with. The fourth point to be noticed was the change of designation from lodge to chapter. The word chapter derived from kaput or head, and the reason for change of names lies, however, much deeper than in the fact that the royal arch stands at the summit or head of the craft. And when I started telling about my sister and her book, I brought that up because at the time I named the event Chapter 2. Now I said 2014. I just got this stuff this week. I've been working on this week. So I named my sister's event Chapter 2 because, she is a retired school teacher. So I, in my innocence, said this was the second part of her life. Her life story was being an author. Isn't that beautiful? How, your actual life is actually playing out the ritual. Isn't that something? When you get this confirmation. Like I said, because her book was, Talitha Kumi, the little girl risen from the dead. Okay. So it has reference in a twofold way to the capitular rank and consciousness of the Archmason himself. In virtue of his headship or supremacy over his material nature, he has passed beyond mere craft work and governing the lodge of his lower nature, which one has now been made the docile instrument and servant of one's spiritual self. Henceforth, one's energies are employed primarily upon the spiritual plane. The head of the material organism of man is the spirit of man, and the spirit consciously conjoined with the universal spirit is deity's supreme instrument and vehicle in the temporal world. Such a one's physical organism and brain have become sublimated and keyed up to a condition and an efficiency immensely in advance of average humanity. And that's why I'm always saying, sublime, because divine, even though, in some aspects it does mean light, but it also can mean separated or divided, the prefix div. Okay. Psychological processes are involved, which cannot be discussed here beyond saying that in such a man, the entire nervous system contributes to to change certain ganglia and light up certain brain centers in a way of which the ordinary mind knows nothing. The nervous system provides the storage batteries and conducive medium of the spirit's energies, just as the telegraph wires are the media for transmitting electrical energy. But the true master mason, in virtue of his mastership, knows how to control and apply these energies. They culminate and come to self-consciousness in one's head and in one's intelligence. And in this respect, we may refer to a heavily veiled scriptural testimony, the import of which goes quite unperceived to the uninstructed reader. The Gospels record that the passion of the great exemplar and master concluded at a place called Golgotha in the Hebrew tongue. That is the place of a skull. That is to say, it terminated in the head or seat of intelligence and in a mystery of spiritual consciousness. And to me, I said that which during matriarchy, the head is the womb, where within the water of life reside the potential fish. The same truth is also testified to, though again under veils of symbolic phrasing, in the reference to the spring of acacia planted at the head of the grave of the Masonic Grand Master and prototype Hiram Abiff. The grave is the candidate's soul. The sprig of acacia typifies the latent akasa, to use an Eastern term, or divine germ planted in that soil and waiting to become quickened into activity in his intelligence, or the head of that plant. When that sprig of acacia blooms at the head of his soul's sepulchre, he will understand at one and the same moment the mystery of Golgotha, the mystery of the death of Hiram, and the meaning of the royal arch ceremony of exaltation. It is a mystery of spiritual consciousness, the effervescence of the mind in God, the opening up of the human intelligence in conscious association with the universal and omniscient mind. It is for this reason that the cranium or skull is given prominence in the Master Mason's degree. With this premise, we proceed to considering the ceremony of exaltation. In the ceremony of exaltation, the candidate is in a state of darkness, but the reason of this darkness differs entirely from that which existed at the entered apprentice stage. Then he was but an ignorant beginner upon the quest, making his first irregular, benighted efforts towards the light. Now one has long passed beyond that stage. One comes with the qualifications and equipment of a master mason. Long ago, one found the light that was first sought, and for long has been directing the steps and nourishing growth by its rays. And more, after all this intimacy with one has known it recede from him and disappear in the great ordeal of dereliction of the third degree. When in the dark night of the soul, in utter helplessness of all his powers, one learned how strength could be perfected out of weakness by the potent efficacy of the vital and immortal principle. within, in whose presence the darkness and the light are both alike. One present initial deprivation of light is the darkness of the third degree, carried over into this further experience. It betokens rather a momentary failure to adjust the perception to the new quality of life which is now entered upon. Just as a newborn child is unable at first to coordinate its sight to objects before it. For a while, but only for a brief while, the candidate feels himself in darkness. But one is really blinded rather by excess of light rather than lack of it. In this condition, one undertakes the opening out of a certain place which one proceeds to enter and explore, keeping touch meanwhile with one's companions by a cord or lifeline. The symbolism of all this is singularly rich in allusion to certain interior processes or introspection well defined in the experience of the contemplative mystic and well attested in their records. The place emblematizes once again the material and astral organism, a dense compact of material particles coating the more tenuous interior spirit of man as a shell surrounds the content of an egg. Roll away the stone, it will be recalled, was the first injunction of the Master at the raising of Lazarus. This obstruction removed the psychical organism, becomes detached from the physical, and the mind is free to become introverted and work exploratively upon its own ground, to search the contents of its own unplumbed depths, to probe deeper and deeper into itself, eradicating defects and removing rubble, pushing in and in by the energy of a persistent will, yet retaining contact the while with the outer physical nature by a subtle filament of lifeline which prevents their entire separation. The position is the same as when the body sleeps, whilst the mind is dreaming and vividly active, save as that in dreams the will is not functioning as a consciously directive instrument, as is hypothetically the case with one who, having attained mastership, has all his faculties under volition and control. Yet all this interior work, so rapidly summarized and symbolically enacted in the ceremony, is not the work of a day, nor the casual task of a weakling. The ancients referred to it as the 12 labors of Hercules. And so I just love that this came to me this month, because I feel like Uni and Heracles, Uni's son. So whilst it is arduous and further graphically described by the initiate poet Virgil in the 6th Aeneid and by more recent luminaries, nor even when its nature is fully apprehended is it a work to be lightly undertaken. Throughout the ceremony, the utmost humility is enjoined upon the candidate as the essential qualifications for entering upon this process of self-exploration. One is bidden to draw nigh to the center, but to halt and make obeisance at 3 several stages, at each of which he is told he is approaching more nearly to that central essence, that holy ground of one's being upon which only the humble can walk, that earth which only the meek shall inherit. It is in this stage that the introverted mind, groping for its own foundation and center, reaches at length the bedrock of its being. As the symbolic ceremony exhibits the grasping of an emblem embodying the word of life, I am, so literally and in fact, the questing mind, in coming upon the vital and immortal principle animating it, lays hold on eternal life. It discovers the lost word, the sublime root of its being, from which it has hitherto been so long dissociated. It fails to realize the fact at first, for the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Presently, that darkness will disappear when the day, the new consciousness dawns, and the shadows, the old mentality, flee away. Therefore, it is that this work of the introverted mind and this discovery it makes are exhibited as taking place darkly and amidst subterranean gloom. And so that explains, the inner earth beings. There remains, therefore, one concluding psychological process: to extrovert that knowledge and bring it forward into formalized brain consciousness, so that what the spirit and the soul already know interiorly, the outer mind may also know exteriorly. Subjective awareness does not become knowledge until it has been cerebrated and passed through the alembic of the brain and the logical understanding. When it has so passed through and become formalized, a reciprocal and reflex action between the inner and outer natures is set up, resulting in the illumination of the whole. This extroversion of the subjective perception is symbolically achieved by the return of the candidate from the subterranean depths to the surface, and there rejoin his former companions, sojourners, and effecting a unification of all one's component parts. It is then that the mystery is consummated. The great light breaks. The vital and immortal principle comes to self-consciousness in that one. The glory of the Lord is revealed to her, and her flesh sees it. So far as it is possible for symbolic ceremonial to portray it, this consummation is represented by the restoration to light and the revelation that then meets the candidate's gaze. One's condition differs now from any that has preceded it. It is I am, merely one of the illumination by the supernal light. It is one of identification with her. She and I have become one, as a white-hot iron is indistinguishable from the furnace flame engulfing it. At the outside of one's Masonic quest, the predominant wish of that heart was light. The impulse was not his own. It was that of the light itself, the primal light of light, the sublime, substantial word, I am, seeking self-development Consciousness is the light, becomes self-perceptive by polarization within an efficient psychological organism. Man provides the only organism adapted to the attainment of that self-perception, but only when that organism is purified and prepared sufficiently for the achievement. In the royal arch, that achievement is hypothetically effected. And as I said before, culturally, the royal arch is the Per Em Harut. The condition attained by the illumined candidate is the equivalent of what in Christian theology is known as the beatific vision, and in the East as samadhi. It is also spoken of as universal or God consciousness, since the percipient transcending all sense of personal individualization, time and space, is co-conscious with all that is. One has entered the bliss and peace, surpassing the temporal understanding, which is limited to perceiving the discords, antinomies, and contrasts characterizing finite existence. One has risen to that exalted state where all these find their resolution in the blissful concord of the eternal. One is in conscious sympathy and identity of feeling with all that lives and feels. And that is known as compassion. In virtue of that universal charity and limitless love, which is the corollary of perceiving the unity of all in the being of deity, and which at the outset of one's progress was told was the summit of the Mason's profession. One sees too that there is a universe within as well as without, that he himself microcosmically sums up and contains all that manifested to his temporal intelligence as the vast spatial universe around him. One is himself conscious of being the measure of the universe. One realizes that the earth, the heaven, and all their contents are externalizations, projected images of corresponding realities present within one's own self. As the perfected through which one's organism has passed to attain to that perfection, the four symbolic standards exhibiting lion, ox, man, and eagle are very ancient glyphs, declaring, among other things, the story of the soul's evolution and its progress from the passional wild beast stage to one which, while still sensuous and animal, is docile and disciplined for service, and thence to the stage of human rationalities. And then the four become Pisces, Aries, Virgo, and Libra. And thence to the stage of human rationality, which at length culminates in upward soaring spirituality. Similarly, the displayed banners of the 12 Israelitish tribes are again but figures of their prototypes, the 12 zodiacal sections of those heavens which could not exist or be discernible to the outward eye, were they not also the phenomenalized aspect of a reality cognizable by the inward eye, whilst gathered beneath these emblems are those who represent the tribes of no terrestrial nation, but are the tribes of deity. For heavenly hierarchies that constitute an archetypal canopy or holy arch above the visible creation, and that mediate to it the influence of that all-embracing triune spirit of power, wisdom, and love, in which the entire composite structure lives, moves, and has its being. In the beginning, the goddess created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the goddess said, "Let there be light," and there was light. With these words began the sacred script, which is the sacramental token of that living word by whom all things were made, and are still in the making, and whose life is the light of men. The lover of truth who recovers that lost word in the sense of regaining vital organic integration into it, and who therefore is one with its light and life, is able to verify this old creation story in its personal dense matrix, out of which his finer being has emerged, and of his own heavens or ethereal body of substantialized radiance, which, as the iridescent sash of the order is meant to denote, now cover one with light as a garment. One is able to discern that it was oneself who at first was without form and void, and who in virtue of that fiat lux has at last become transformed from chaos and unconsciousness into a form to perfect and lucid as to become a co-conscious vehicle of sublime wisdom herself. With this symbolic attainment of beatific vision at the restoration to light, the effective part of the royal arch ceremony as an initiatory rite concludes. What follows up on it is an anticlimax and allegorical exposition of a similar nature to the traditional history in the Master Mason's degree. This takes the form of a mythos, or a dramatic narrative by the three sojourners, describing their release from captivity in Babylon, their return to Jerusalem under an impulse to assist in rebuilding the destroyed national temple, their work among its ruins, and the discovery of an ancient and apparently important archive. The perspicacious mind will not fail to perceive in this historical or quasi-historical narrative an allegory of the spiritual process which has been going on within the lover of truth. It is she, as it is every human soul or spirit, every human spirit that has been in Babylonian bondage, in captivity to the babbled confusion of mundane existence, the tyranny of material interest, and the chaos of one's own disordered nature. It is she who, in revolt from these, has in effect moments sat down and wept by the waters of Babylon, the transient flux of temporal things, and remembered Zion. in a yearning for inward freedom and permanent peace of heart. It is she who finds the temple of her old natural self worthless and in ruins, and realizes that upon its sight she must rebuild another and worthier one. From within herself comes the urge of the inward Lord, curious, which under the mask of Cyrus the king, bid him forthwith depart from this captivity and go up to your true native land and re-erect the Lord's house. It is she who discovers among the rubbles of one's old self the plans and the material for the new structure. And ultimately, when that new structure is completed, and when from natural man she has become reorganized into soul man, it is she who is able to perceive the wonders of her own constitution, to behold her own earth and heavens now fused into a unity, to which both material and her spiritual nature were necessary contributors. The constitution of the chapter, as first revealed to the lover of truth, is therefore a symbol of the perfected organism. She sees that it is a polarized east and west, the east occupied by the three principles signifying one's spiritual role, the west occupied by the three sojourners, his psychic and materialized pole, each triad being the reflex of the other, yet each triad being an organic unity in itself. St. John testifies to this, and the ceremonial rite is made conformable to the teachings of that great initiate. When he writes, "There are three that bear record in heaven, and these three are one. And there are three that bear witness in earth, and these three agree in one." The meaning of this metaphysical assertion is that just as a ray of white light splits up, as in the rainbow, into three primary colors, which still remain organically united, so both the self-knowing spirit in man and his psychical nature, although monadic, essentially are prismatically dissociable into a trinity. The spirit in man in its triple aspect is therefore appropriately typified by the three principles. They represent the three high attributes of the spirit: holiness, royal supremacy, functional power, referred to in the title of the order, Holy Royal Arch. The middle and neutral term of these three must be considered as differentiating itself into a passive and an active, or a negative and a positive aspect. Although all three act conjointly and as one, as in fact the case with the three principles of a chapter. These three aspects of monadic spirit are personified as Haggai, passive, Joshua, active, with Zerubbabel as the middle term, from which the other two issue and into which they merge. For the central majesty is in one of its aspects silent and withdrawn, and the other functionally active and compulsive. So too with the triad of sojourners at the other pole. They represent the unitary human ego or personality, also in its threefold aspects. They are the incarnated antitype or physicalized reflex of one's archetypal, unincarnated, and overshadowing spirit. Hence, they are designated sojourners as being but transient, consociated pilgrims or wayfarers upon a plane of impermanence. In contrast with the enduring life of the deathless spirit, whose projection upon its lower world they are. Psychologically, human personality is distributed into a passive negative subconsciousness and has active positive intelligence linked together by a central coordinating principle. The combined three constituting man's unitary individuality. My ego, with its central and directive power of will, is my principal sojourner. My subconsciousness, with its passive intuitional capacity, and my practical intelligence, with its active and connecting powers of thought and understanding, are my assistant sojourners. Let me see to it that, like their symbolic representatives, they are kept clothed in white and so able to reflect and react to their correspondences in the eastern or spiritual pole of my being. The nexus of connecting medium between man's spiritual and bodily poles is represented by a third triad, by the two scribes and the janitor. The more important of these scribes is attached to the east pole and is, as it were, its emissary towards the west. The other is associated with the western pole, and his activities are directed eastward, while the doorkeeper is the point of contact with the world without. In one of their many significances, they typify the middle term between spirit and matter, the astral medium or psychic bridge, in virtue of which contact between them is possible. Heavily veiled, the sacramentalism of a council of the Jewish Sanhedrin, the royal arch ceremony, therefore exhibits in a most graphic manner the psychological rationale of the final stage of regeneration. To the literalist unacquainted with the fact that in both sacred writ and the teachings of the mystery, surface appearances are always intended to be transposed into spiritual values, and that quasi-historic characters are meant to be impersonations of philosophic facts or principles. Some difficulty may be felt on being asked to translate the quasi-historicity of the ceremonial text into the spiritualized interpretations here offered. The education and enlightenment of the understanding is, however, one of the deliberate interiors of initiatory rites, and until the mind is able to rise above merely material facts and habituate itself to functioning in the truer realms of ideas which materialize into facts and make facts possible, there is small chance of it profiting from rites like those of masonry, which are of wholly negligible value, but for the spiritual force and vitalizing energy of their inherent ideas. It may therefore be both helpful and a corroboration of what has been said if we scrutinize the names of a chapter's officers. What they yield upon analysis will demonstrate that those officers impersonate ideas rather than represent persons. Zerubbabel, Prince of the People. The name literally means a sprouting forth from Babel, or from among the people. Babel and people are two forms of expressing the same idea, and the English word is almost identical with the Hebrew one. Society as a whole, the multitude, the people, Babyloi as it is in Greek, at all times of the world's history constitute a babel of confused aims and interests. But there are always individuals, intellectually or spiritually, in advance of the crowd, and whose ideas, teachings, or example shoot ahead of it. And to such leader, the name Zerubbabel would apply. But this illustration does not express the deeper sense in which the word must be consumed, which is one of personal application. The individual in oneself is a mob, a chaos, a multitude of confused desires, thoughts, and passions, and until these are brought into discipline. The individual is himself a mob, a chaos, a multitude of confused desires, thoughts, and passions, until these are brought into discipline. But present even amidst these and sprouting up from among them, the ordinary man is conscious of a higher and spiritual element in him, which he may cultivate or disregard. But which in his best moments flames up above his lower disordered nature, convinces him of the errors of his way, and entices him to live from that higher level. That loftier element is expressed by the word Zerubbabel. It is the apex and focus point of his spirituality, as distinguished from his ordinary carnal intelligence, the summit of all one's spirituality, as distinguished from ordinary carnal intelligence, the summit of all faculties, the prince of one's people. Those same faculties or people are referred to in the word meaning my people, having obtained mercy or become regenerate, and in the text, the people that sat in darkness have seen a great light. 2. Haggai, the prophet. As has been shown before, the spiritual principle differentiates into a passive and an active aspect. Haggai represents the passive aspect and signifies at once the blissful and self-contemplative nature of the spirit. It is called the prophet because of the power of insight and omniscience, characterizing that which transcends the sense of time and abides eternally, and because it projects into the lower intelligence intuitions, foreglimpses, and intimations of a prophetic nature. From the same word is derived the Greek word hagios, holy. Joshua, the son of Josadak, the high priest, personifies the active executive aspect of spirit. Literally, Joshua means the divine savior, and Josadak, divine righteousness, whilst the high priest connotes a mediatorial factor between man and deity. The title in its entirety, therefore, intimates that the human spirit or sublime principle in man functions intermediately between deity and one's lower nature to promote the latter's salvation and perfection. We have previously shown how the Master Mason must be his own high priest and walk upon the checkered floor work of his elementary nature by learning to trample upon it. Everybody knows it's loving basketball in this house. So to see Kyrie trample on the logo at the Boston Gardens, I'm just like, I'm sorry, like, okay, I get the message. Thus the three principles form a unity figuring man's spiritual pole in his triple aspect. They represent the summit of his being as it lives on the plane of the spirit, holy, royal, supreme. Blissful, because in a state of holiness or wholeness. Royal, because the son of the king of all, and that's king really means authority. Powerful, because of its power to subdue, transmute, and redeem all that is below its own purity and perfection. 4 and 5, Ezra and Nehemiah. In the great mystery system of Egypt, which long anteceded the Hebrew system, the regenerate candidate who had achieved the highest possible measure of self-transmutation of his lower nature was accorded the title of Asar, in Greek Osiris. It was the equivalent of attaining Christhood. The nature of the perfecting process and the rituals in connection therewith are, thanks to certain modern scholars, available to us and are recommended to the student who desires to know how arduous and real that process was, and the extremely high degree of regeneration aimed at. In Hebrew, the title Osiris became changed into Azarias and sometimes Zeruiah, and still further corrupted into Esdras and Ezra, the name of the senior scribe of the royal arch. To understand the significance of the two scribes, Ezra and Nehemiah, it is necessary to recall that in the biblical account of the return from Babylonian captivity, these two were leading men, transposing this historicized narrative into a spiritual implication. Ezra and Nehemiah personify two distinct stages of the mystical progress made by the lover of truth, who essays to renounce the babble of his lower nature and by reorganizing himself regain his native spiritual home and condition. Nehemiah, whose place in the chapter is in the southwest, is a figure of a certain measure of that reorganization and return. Like his biblical prototype, he symbolizes the candidate engaged in rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem and occupied in the great work of self-reconstruction, from which he will not be beguiled into coming down by the appeals and blandishments of the outer world. Ezra, whose position is in the northeast, indicates a much more advanced measure of progress from west to east. The discerning student who will peruse the biblical books of Nehemiah and Ezra, including the apocryphal books of Ezra, in this light and with this key to their true purport, will not fail to profit by the instructions they will yield. Hence, too, they are called scribes. Both of them are recorders of and testifiers to distinct but representative experience encountered in the inner man at different stages of the great work of self-integration and journeying from a Babylon condition to spiritual Jerusalem. Here we bring to an end our examination of the true meaning and purpose of the royal arch ceremony, dealing as it does with the supreme human experience, which none can fully appreciate without undergoing it. It is the greatest and most monumentous rite in Masonry, and no one who studies it comprehendingly and in its sacramental significance will withhold admiration either for the profound knowledge and insight of the now unidentifiable mystic and initiate who conceived it, or for the skill with which it was compiled and cast one's knowledge in dramatic expression. The pity of it is that those who practice the rite make no effort to penetrate its meaning and are content with the unenlightened perfunctory performance of a ritual, which even exoterically is singularly striking, beautiful, and suggestive. The least reflective upon it must suggest that Masonry here, dealing with the building work of no outward structure, but with the re-erection of the falling, disordered temple of the human soul, spirit. And that even assuming that it but memorialized some long last historic event, those events can have no vital bearing upon the life, character, or conduct of anyone today, and would not justify the existence of an elaborate secret order to perpetuate them. If those events and this rite be symbolic of something deeper and something personal, if they sacramentalize truth perpetually valid and capable of present realization in those who ceremonially reenact them, then they call for fuller and more serious attention than is usually accorded. Moreover, if the royal arch be the symbolic representation of a supreme experience attained and attainable only in sanctity and by the regenerate, it follows that the craft degrees leading up to and qualifying for it will take on a much deeper sense than commonly received, and must be regarded as solemn instructions in the requisite preparation for that regenerate condition. The craft work is unfinished without the attainment foreshadowed in the royal arch. The attainment, in turn, is impossible without the discipline of the preliminary labors, the purification of mind and desire, and the crucifixion unto death of the self-will, which constitute the test of merit qualifying for entrance to that Jerusalem which has no geographical site and which is called the City of Peace, because it implies conscious rest of the soul in Mother. For many, the suggestion that the attainment of such a condition is possible or thinkable whilst we are still here in the flesh may be surprising or even incredible, but such doubt is unwarranted, and the Masonic doctrine negates it, as has been already shown to the contrary. That doctrine postulates not the absence, but the possession of the material organism, the body, as a necessary factor in advancing the evolution of the human spirit. Organism is the vessel in which our base metal has to be transmuted into gold. It is the fulcrum furnishing the resistance requisite for the spirit's energizing into unfoldment and self-consciousness. Physical death, therefore, is not an advancement of, but an interference with the work of regeneration or rebirth. The night cometh when no man can work, and when the soul merely passes from labor to refreshment until recalled to labor once more at the task of self-conquest. It is but figurative of that necessary dying to self, which implies the voluntary decreasing assertiveness of our temporal nature to permit of a corresponding ascendancy of the spiritual. But if in the hands of its present exponents, Masonry is now rather a dead letter than a living, effectual initiatory rite, capable of quickening the spirituality of its candidates. It still remains for the earnest and perspicuous aspirant to the deeper verities and instructive economy of the science of self-gnosis and regeneration. For such, these papers were written, that they may both learn something of the original design of the order and educate their imagination in the principle of that science. And to such, in conclusion, may be commended that temple hymn of the Hebrew initiate, which of all the Psalms of David refers with most poignant reference to the subject matter of the supreme order of the Holy Royal Arch of Jerusalem, and the personal attainment of the blessed and perfected condition which that title implies. I was glad when they said unto me, Let us go into the house of the Lord. Our feet shall stand within thy gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem is builded as a city that is compact together. Thither the tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord. For there are set thrones of judgment, the thrones of the house of David. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They shall prosper that love it. Peace is within her walls, and plenteousness within her palaces. For my brethren and companions' sake, I will say, peace be within thee. In those few lines is sketched all that is implied in the symbolic spectacle that greets the eyes of the royal archmason at the supreme moment of his restoration to light. Exalted into and become identified with the supreme bliss, peace, self-consciousness of the all-pervasive and omniscient spirit, one sees how he has gone conscious of all. One sees how he has gone up out of Babylon, of his old complex and disordered nature, and upon its ruins has built for himself an ethereal body of glory, a house of the Lord. He sees how this ecstatic condition and this new made celestial body are the sublimated products of his ecstatic condition, are the sublimated product of his former self and its temporal organism. He sees how such separate part and faculty of that old nature, whereas it were of the zodiacal divisions of his own microcosm, has contributed its purified essence to form a new organism, a new heaven and a new earth, and how these essences, like 12 diversified tribes, have asserted convergently and finally coalesced and become fused into a unity or a new whole, a city that is called Jerusalem, within whose walls is the peace of which passeth understanding, and whose palaces reveal to the enfranchised soul the unfailing plenteousness and fecundity of the indissoluble trinity of wisdom and love and power, from which man and the universe have issued, and into which they are destined to return. The antithesis of the heavenly city is the confused Babylon city of this world, of which it is written to all captives therein, come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sin, and that ye receive not her plagues. And in a word, the royal arch ceremony sacramentally portrays the last phase of the mystical journey of the exiled soul from Babylon to Jerusalem, as it escapes from its captivity to this lower world and, passing the veils of matter and form, breaks through bondage of corruption into the formless spirit and realizes the glorious liberty as the child of God. So here we can put together the understanding of the sacred marriage, or hierogamos, in its totality as the royal holy arch. And it's just beautiful. Namaste.